You've been staring at that door for months now, waiting, knocking, whispering prayers through the keyhole, telling yourself, if I wait long enough, it will open. But what if it was never meant to open? What if the silence isn't a delay, but a redirection? Sometimes the loudest answer from heaven is no sound at all. You call it silence, but heaven calls it strategy. Not every closed door is a punishment. Some are mercies we don't recognize yet. We are trained to equate opportunity with visibility. If it's not big, bold, and directly ahead, it must not be from God. But God often speaks in subtleties, not through thunder, but through the rustle of leaves. Not through grand entrances, but through narrow, overlooked frames. The window was always there, but your eyes were locked on the door. Your heart measured God's goodness by the size of the handle you couldn't turn. And all the while, a breeze came through the cracks of the window, trying to remind you, this is not the only way forward. You kept praying for that job, that relationship, that stage, that platform, and because the door didn't open, you assumed heaven had closed entirely. But here's what no one tells you. God's plans don't always come with hinges. Some come with ladders. Some come disguised as interruptions. Some arrive as smaller paths, quieter starts, different timelines. You are waiting for something obvious, but windows rarely are. They demand humility to notice. They demand faith to crawl through, because windows don't open like doors. They require you to bow, to stoop, to get uncomfortable, and maybe that's the point, you said, but it's not what I prayed for. And heaven gently replies, it's better than what you asked, because sometimes the window leads to something the door never could. Not just a room, but a view, not just access, but vision, and this is where we must grow. We must stop defining God's faithfulness by our preferences, stop treating delay as denial, stop assuming that convenience equals confirmation. The truth is, what you call detour, heaven calls direction. You were so focused on what ended, you missed what just began. So determined to reopen the door, you missed the window that cracked open beside it. You prayed for a yes, you received a redirection. Different doesn't mean lesser. You say you trust God's plan, but only when it matches your picture. Faith isn't just believing when the door swings wide. It's believing when the window is small and the path is narrow. It's choosing to move forward through uncertainty, choosing to see promise in limitation, choosing to crawl through tight spaces because you believe freedom is on the other side. Sometimes God doesn't change the door, He changes your posture. He invites you to stop pounding and start perceiving, to stop asking why and start asking where else, because faith isn't passive, it listens. It looks, it moves, so maybe today's not about what didn't open. Maybe it's about what already has, the window, the shift, the whisper, the invitation you almost ignored. Look again, not where you want the answer to come from, but where it already has. You've been standing at the door. It's time to crawl through the window, because grace isn't always found in what you expected, it's found in what you were willing to notice. And sometimes the greatest breakthroughs begin through the smallest frames. You've heard it all your life. When one door closes, another opens. But no one tells you what to do when no door opens. They don't tell you how long the hallway can be, or how heavy silence feels when the handle won't turn. So you wait and wait and wait some more, because you were taught that waiting equals faith. You were told to stand still, to not move until it's obvious, to trust the plan even when it's not moving. And so you fix your eyes on the frame of that door, you measure your hope by its cracks, you count the minutes since it last creaked, you replay prayers like knocking rhythms, thinking maybe this time it'll open. But doors don't open just because you stare at them, and God doesn't work on timers. What no one tells you is that sometimes faith is not in the waiting, it's in the noticing the other way. The small opening, the unexpected shift, the thing you ignored because it wasn't what you asked for. We're trained to see only what we expect, so when life breaks the pattern, we call it wrong. When God speaks in a new tone, we call it silence. When the path turns, we think we're lost, but maybe we're not lost, just unwilling to adjust the lens. The problem isn't that the door is closed. The problem is you made the door your only option. You built your entire sense of purpose around that thing. That job, that person, that dream. You said, if not this, then nothing. And God, in mercy, whispered back, not that, but something else. We are trained in systems. We are raised on formulas. We love blueprints. And so we spiritualize predictability. We think divine means obvious. We think favor means immediate. We think faith means stillness. But sometimes faith means movement, not frantic movement, intentional movement. The kind that looks around the room when the door doesn't open. The kind that notices the window slightly ajar behind the curtain. The kind that asks, is this also God? And the kind that answers, maybe this is how he works today. We're trained to chase the familiar. But God often moves through the unfamiliar, the overlooked, the less popular route, the quiet shift in your spirit that says, try again, but this time, differently. It's not rebellion, it's discernment. The mistake isn't in your desire. The mistake is in your fixation. You thought faith was tied to outcome, but real faith is tied to obedience. And obedience means being willing to move where God is moving, even if it's not through the door. You're not lazy, you're not lacking, you're simply looking in one direction too long. And while you waited for the door to turn, you missed the window glowing behind you, the light creeping in quietly. The breeze that keeps brushing your shoulder, that wasn't coincidence, that was invitation, that was God saying, you don't have to force it. That door was never meant to shape you, only to test you. Your future is not behind it, it's beside it, or beyond it, but it's still here. We don't teach people how to shift, we teach them how to wait. We don't teach them how to search again, we just tell them to hold on. But some of you aren't holding on to hope anymore, you're holding on to a method. A way, a system, and God is trying to pull you into something more creative, more flexible, more free. You were taught to knock, now learn to notice. You were taught to stand, now learn to explore. You were taught to endure, now learn to discern, because doors are not the only signs of direction. And movement doesn't always mean leaving. It sometimes means looking again. You're not being punished, you're being prepared for a way that doesn't look like what you imagined. For a future that doesn't use hinges, for an answer that comes through the side, quietly, patiently, unexpectedly, because the window was never locked. It was just waiting for you to turn around. You saw it once. You wanted it deeply. You built your life around the image of that one opportunity, and then it slipped, and you never moved on. You called it a loss, but it became more than that. It became an anchor. And now you're not still because you're peaceful. You're still because you're stuck. You can't see forward because you've chained your vision to the past, the job that never called back, the dream that never took off, the person who never returned your effort. You stare at the locked door like it owes you something, but no door owes you anything, and not every opportunity was designed to last forever. Some things were meant to stretch you, not settle you. To teach you to try, not to train you to cling. Obsession isn't passion, it's paralysis in disguise. It feels noble, it sounds loyal, but it's blinding, because when you obsess over the thing that closed, you miss the hand trying to guide you elsewhere. What began as hope can quietly become an idol. You don't bow to a golden statue, you bow to the what if. You worship the version of life that never happened, and so you wait for a door God already walked away from. You pray for resurrection where he's offering resurrection somewhere else, but because it's not where you hoped, you call it empty. You dismiss the open window because it doesn't wear the clothes you pictured. It looks smaller, quieter, less glamorous, but it's open. You keep asking for clarity, but you don't need more clarity. You need release. Release from the blueprint you drew before you knew the terrain. Release from the version of success that only included that outcome, because as long as you're obsessed with what you lost, You'll never be free to embrace what's growing. God isn't confined to your original idea. And neither is your future. That door wasn't the destination. It was a detour that did its job. It revealed your desires. It tested your motives. It shaped your discipline. And then it ended, but you didn't. The opportunity closed. You didn't, but you act like the two are the same, like your calling was chained to one path, like your purpose died when that thing failed. You weren't made for one route. You were made for resilience. You were made to adapt, to shift, to reroute with grace. But obsession with what didn't happen blinds you to what could. Your hands are still full of yesterday. So how can you receive today? Your prayers are aimed at a past chapter. But new pages are already being written. You just won't turn the page. This is what obsession does. It makes a monument out of a moment. It turns a closed door into a shrine, and every time you revisit it, you reinforce the lie that it was your only shot. But divine purpose isn't that fragile. One missed door doesn't end the story. One failed dream doesn't cancel the mission unless you let it, unless you make the closed door your compass. You're afraid to look elsewhere. Not because there's no path, but because you've tied your identity to the door that rejected you. You've mistaken loss for lack. You've mistaken delay for denial. But if your eyes ever adjust, you'll see the alternatives. You'll see the open window beside the shut door. You'll notice the seed sprouting where you never planted. You'll hear the voice you've been muting with your expectations, because alternatives are not less holy. They're not leftovers. They're not plan B. They're proof that God is more creative than we imagined, that He builds futures out of fragments, that He opens paths no one even marked on the map. But you must be willing to release the obsession, to grieve what didn't work, to let go of the picture and step into the presence, because God does not recycle old doors to prove a point. He opens something new to prove His nature, and once your eyes are open to that, you'll stop asking for the old way back. And you'll start thanking Him for showing you another way forward. You stood in front of the door. You gave it everything. Your time, your prayers, your heart. And when it didn't open, you called it rejection. Because that's what we're taught. If it doesn't work, it means you weren't enough. If it closes, it means you failed. But what if that's not the full story? What if the no you heard wasn't rejection? It was a reroute. What if God didn't say stop? He just said not here, not in the way you thought, not through the person you expected, not on the timeline you scripted. You felt discarded, but you were actually being delivered. Delivered from settling, delivered from what would have drained you, delivered from being trapped in a version of life too small for who you're becoming. You were waiting for validation. You wanted a yes to prove you were worthy. But your value is not proved by what opens. It's proved by who's guiding. God doesn't need to say yes to show He's with you. Sometimes His love is loudest when He says no, because some doors are dangerous when opened too soon. Some opportunities look like blessings but arrive as burdens, and some things you begged for would have broken you if they arrived on your terms. So He blocked it, not because He doesn't love you, but because He does. You say, but I was ready, and heaven says, maybe the door wasn't, or maybe your readiness was real, but the assignment was never yours. Just because you can handle something doesn't mean you're meant to hold it. You prayed for growth, you prayed for purpose, you prayed for clarity, but you didn't know clarity sometimes comes disguised as disruption, a detour, a door that doesn't budge, and instead of moving forward, you stood frozen, calling it defeat. You assumed no meant never, but in heaven's language, no often means look again. Look wider, look deeper, look somewhere you hadn't dared before, because redirection is not rejection, it's protection. It's preparation, it's precision. You didn't fail, you were rerouted, but rerouting is painful when your heart was so attached to the first direction, when your hope was all in one outcome, and your identity quietly wrapped around the idea of that door working. But you are more than that door. You are not the failed plan. You are not the silence that followed. You are not the unanswered email. You are not the goodbye that came too soon. You are still on your way. And sometimes the most powerful thing God can do is say, "This isn't where your story unfolds." So he closes the door, not out of cruelty, out of clarity, because he sees what you can't. He knows the conversations you'll never hear. He knows the weight behind the opportunity. He knows what waits behind the handle. And sometimes the greatest miracle is the one you never saw happen, the one he blocked before it could touch you. But if you're not listening, you'll take that no and tattoo it as your identity. You'll build your future around a wound, and every new opportunity will be filtered through the fear of that closed door. This is how bitterness grows, not because God wasn't good, but because we misread the no. We made it personal. We made it punishment. We never considered it was a pivot. You say, "Why would God let me get that close, just to shut it?" But sometimes he lets you taste it, so you'll learn it's not the feast you thought. He lets you walk toward it, so when he redirects you, you'll walk away with certainty instead of regret, because not every no is meant to be undone. Some are meant to be honored, to be trusted, to be left behind with gratitude, knowing it taught you something the yes never could. So if the door didn't open, don't keep knocking like that's where your identity lives. Stand up, step back, look again. There's another path forming, not in front of you, maybe not even beside you, but it's there. A window, a crack of light, a whisper that says, "This way. I've got something better." Let go of needing every door to say yes. Start trusting the one who knows which doors were never yours to begin with. You wanted an answer. You expected a sign. You stood in silence, thinking heaven had gone quiet. But heaven wasn't silent. You just didn't know how to listen. You were waiting for thunder, but God came in a whisper. You were searching for fire, but he showed up in stillness. You asked for a miracle. He gave you a moment, and because it wasn't loud, you dismissed it. Because it wasn't obvious, you overlooked it. We are conditioned to notice what is big, to believe what is loud, to chase what glows. But the voice of God often hides in the margins, in the gentle nudge, in the shift you almost ignored, in the feeling that didn't go away. You prayed for guidance, and you expected a lightning bolt. But instead, he gave you a pattern, a repeated conversation, a phrase in a book, a line in a sermon, a thought you couldn't explain, and you said, "That's just coincidence." But it wasn't. It was clarity disguised as ordinary. The door didn't open, and the window didn't swing wide, but the air changed, your peace shifted, something unsettled in your spirit. That wasn't your doubt. It was his direction. God doesn't need volume to be clear. He doesn't compete for your attention. He waits for it. And when your focus is stuck on the door, you won't hear what he's saying from the window. You're expecting the spectacular, but he's speaking through the simple. Through the tension in your chest when you're about to compromise, through the restlessness when you stay somewhere too long, through the joy you feel when you touch what aligns with your purpose. This is why stillness matters. Not because stillness proves spirituality, but because stillness sharpens your hearing. You can't hear whispers in chaos. You can't sense wind when you're sprinting, and so God waits, not because he's distant, but because he wants to be noticed, not heard by accident, heard by intention. But you were trained to measure his presence by performance, by crowds, by answers that fit your expectations. So when he moves differently, you say he's absent. But he's not absent. He's in the silence. He's in the subtle shift. He's in the thing you almost skipped. God does not just move in the extraordinary. He is woven into your ordinary, the conversation you had on the way to give up, the door that didn't open and the peace that followed, the book that you weren't going to read but suddenly did, the stranger's words that echoed your own hidden thoughts. He's not always trying to change your world with a bang. Sometimes he's trying to change you with a whisper, but we don't like whispers. We like confirmation. We like control. We want the kind of signs we can screenshot. We want clarity we can prove to others. But heaven isn't interested in performance. It's interested in formation. And formation happens when you stop overlooking what feels too small, because small is where seeds grow, and whispers are how God speaks to people who are willing to draw close. You were so focused on the door closing, you didn't see how your heart opened. You missed how your vision widened. You didn't notice how something in you was loosening, the fear, the attachment, the illusion of control. That was him, that quiet work in your soul, that subtle shaping of your desires, that letting go that didn't feel like failure, just release. But we call it silence because we were listening for a sound, not sensing for his presence. We wanted words, he offered peace. We wanted fireworks, he gave firelight. And this is how redirection works, not always with announcements, but with alignment. Not always with instant clarity, but with consistent nudges that refuse to go away. So check again, not the door, your spirit. How do you feel when you think about staying? How do you feel when you imagine leaving? Where is the stillness? Where is the unease? Because that's how he leads. Not just through signs in the sky, but through whispers in the soul, through what you nearly ignored because it didn't match your expectation of how God should speak. But God isn't trying to meet your expectations. He's trying to shape your awareness so you can hear the voice behind you saying, "This is the way. Walk in it." Even if the way comes not through the door, but through a window you forgot to notice.